Hello and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of Intelligent Transport and Liftango, I would like to thank you all for attending. My name is Leah Hockley. I'm the editor of Intelligent Transport and I will be moderating the audience Q&A at the end of the webinar. Joining me today is Neil MacRae, Partnership Manager for the Highlands and Islands Transport Partnership, Julie Vinders, Project Officer for the South East of Scotland Transport Partnership, and Kevin Orr, CEO and co-founder of Liftango. Following today's presentations and discussion, we will move on to a live question and answer session where you can pose your questions to the speakers. Please do remember that you can submit your questions at any point during the webinar using the questions panel, which is situated in the menu on the right. So before we start the webinar today, we would like to begin with a quick poll. We would like to know, how likely are you to deploy a DRT service in the next 12 months? Please choose whichever option best applies to you. Have you got a project confirmed? Are you actively looking for technology partners? Are you considering commencing feasibility work? Or are you not at all likely to deploy a DRT service in the next year? If you could please respond, that would be fantastic. Lovely. Thank you to everyone who responded. So the answers that we got to that poll was that 20% have a project confirmed, only 3% are actively looking for technology partners, 40% are considering commencing feasibility work, and 37% are currently not at all looking to deploy a DRT service. So Neil, Julie, Kevin, are those the responses that you expected, or were you expecting something different?
I think that's a positive sign. A lot of people sort of showing interest, commencing feasibility work as a sort of exploratory exercise, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that's where we see a lot of people's and councils sort of position is where and how will DRT work. So that feasibility stage is pretty typical.
Yeah, I think any poll where you've got 2/3 interested is pretty good.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, to begin the webinar today, I will now hand over to Neil.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I am Neil MacRae, Partnership Manager with HITRANS. HITRANS, the regional transport partnership for the Highlands and Islands. And there's a nice image there of some of the, I won't say typical because it's such a varied geography that we cover, but a nice image of part of our area. And I'm just going to take you through a few slides today. So first of all, yes, I've described you HITRANS are a statutory regional transport partnership that covers 5 local authority areas listed there on the slide. And just to give you a feel for the scale of the place, we cover 40% of Scotland's landmass, but only account for 10% of its population. Or to put it maybe in an international context, we are quite similar in size to the Netherlands, which is a population of 17 million, but we have only a population of 500,000 across our entire area. This presents itself with unique transport challenges and challenges more generally. The largest settlement in the Highlands and Islands is Vinders, which only has a population of 60,000, and there is only one other settlement larger than 20,000. So we have a lot of space, but not many people, which makes it very difficult to provide, or can be very difficult to provide transport services. The other unique aspect is, or maybe in common with other Scandinavian countries, is the number of inhabited islands that we also have. So there's around 60 inhabited islands in our part of the network, and that obviously leads to a complex series of air and ferry services to connect those islands. Just moving on. So yeah, one of the important themes that this results in is transport poverty across the region. This comes in 2 forms, I would say. First, in terms of, I suppose, a poverty of services, we have a limited network, and where there are commercial services, they are predominantly restricted to those urban centres that I mentioned, but also to long distance interurban routes. Beyond that, there are the dispersed geography that have next to no public transport, or if they do, it is termed a lifeline service. What do we mean by a lifeline service? Well, it's where it could apply to any mode or piece of infrastructure, but essentially it's a situation where either your link to your nearby amenities or important services is provided either by only one road or say a single bus service on any given day. And the result of that is obviously if you lose that, then there is no alternative. It's not a matter of, yes, I'll go on a diversionary route, or there'll be an alternate bus or rail. That is your public transport service, which creates obviously a high dependency on it and makes it a very fragile network. And the other thing to highlight in terms of transport poverty across the region is that it is the percentage of household cost spend on transport is significantly higher than the rest of the country. So all these things considered, there is obviously high car ownership in the Highlands and Islands, but I think that the last bullet there is an important one to consider, that almost a quarter of all households still don't have access to a car. So it is essential for us to provide still high quality bus services. Just moving on to the next slide. Yes, so stepping into this this breach, if you like, HITRANS has sought to work with local authorities where already in the pre-COVID climate there has been falling bus mileage, and a lot of scheduled services, fixed route lines, have already transitioned to more flexible and demand responsive provision. These often are quite limited and are restricted to particular geographies and hours of operation that many in the local population aren't even aware of, and they've struggled from how they've been marketed and promoted. And what we've sought to do is we've collaborated with the local authorities, but also with Transport Scotland, the National Transport Agency, to find a funding package where we can procure a single demand responsive platform that would be custom branded across the whole of the HITRANS area, and would offer an opportunity to pull all those existing systems that often currently operate on a manual basis under the one platform, and an opportunity to grow and expand both how they're used and how the ability for the operators to get the most out of them. So just one final slide from myself. Yeah, similar to the first one, you can see the different local authorities or municipalities that we have and are currently working with, and we're also working with the main bus operators within the region who are looking at some of their existing services as well, and moving them from fixed lines to demand responsive with the availability of Liftango's new solution. So we're really excited. This is an initial 3-year plan, and the aim is for us to transition as many of these services over the next 3 years as possible onto this platform. We will also look to integrate it with existing transport offering that we have. So for instance, we already recently just launched our Go High Mass platform, and we'll make sure that our the new DRT platform is fully integrated into that as well. And looking forward basically to working with Kevin and his team over the next 3 years so that we can build on a real success story here, and hopefully it'll offer a best practice template that could be replicated in other parts of Scotland and elsewhere. And that is it for me. I'll just hand over to the next presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to Intelligent Transport and Liftango for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Julie. I work as a project officer at SEStran, which is the transport partnership for the southeast of Scotland. So let me just try and move on to the next slide. So who's SEStran? We are the sort of, similar to HITRANS organisation, a regional transport partnership for the southeast of Scotland, representing 8 local authorities highlighted there in blue. We're a statutory partnership established by the Transport Act, and the 8 local authorities that we represent are a mix of urban areas and smaller towns and cities, and some more rural parts of the region as well, such as the Scottish borders. Probably not as rural as some parts of the Highlands and Islands, but still some real transport challenges in these areas, mostly in the rural areas. We cover 28% of Scotland's population and about 10.5 of Scotland's land area. So the transport challenges in our region are quite varied. We conducted a strategic study into demand responsive transport back 2 years ago now, in March 2020. So this was before the pandemic really kicked off, and we looked at the sort of strengths and weaknesses of demand responsive transport services. So existing dial and ride services in the region, and the study found that there's a decade of falling transport patronage in public transport, 100 million fewer passenger journeys in Scotland, and there are also significant gaps in the public transport network, with an average of 5% with no of the population with no public transport access to key destinations, and this is higher, significantly higher actually in the Scottish borders, around 19, and 9% in East Lothian, and the map on the right sort of shows the dots where there is public transport and the sort of gaps in that network. There's also trends of increasing fares, longer journey times due to an increasing in congestion, and discontinued rural services, and challenge for local authorities to keep these services running as they are under pressure and a constrained budget to keep supported services going. Obviously, the impact of COVID-19 has been significant as well, and certainly doesn't help in facing those challenges. But the DRT study that we did also saw an opportunity for demand responsive transport and technology innovation to help address some of those challenges and increase transport coverage and patronage, particularly in some rural areas, and offer communities in these areas a better transport solution that better meets their needs. So we, following this study, Transport Scotland announced the Mass Investment Fund, and we developed a project bid under the second round of funding called the SEStran project. And in this, we secured funding for this, which was confirmed late last year. As part of this project, we are proposing to develop a mobility as a service platform in East Lothian, which is the county to the east of Edinburgh, to develop a mobility as a service platform in and around Musselburgh and the Brunton Hall Journey Hub, which is a mobility hub which integrates different modes of transport, such as electric vehicle car clubs, e-bike sharing. There's a bus stop, taxi rank, and a nearby train station. So our proposal is to integrate those modes of transport into a mass platform, which adds that sort of digital layer and helps it make it easier for people to book and pay for their transport services. And another element of our proposed project is to introduce a DRT trial in that linked to that area. So currently looking at the 109 service in East Lothian and making that a more flexible service, but also just more generally looking at DRT options as part of that trial to test the DRT technology, and partnering with Liftango and Liftango's technology to try and introduce that to our region. So the mobility hubs, the concept was inspired by the Share North project, which is an Interreg North Sea region project we've been involved in since 2016. And the project focuses all around in linking shared mobility to existing transport infrastructure in an attempt to help reduce car dependency and provide access to private car, sorry, I shouldn't say private cars, but shared cars, and as and when people need it, and sort of builds on the philosophy that if you are part of a car club, you make a more sort of conscious decision about whether you really need a vehicle, a car to make that journey, or whether you can actually do it as well by bus or by bike. So it's providing that holistic transport offer and making it more integrated and easier for people to use. So the illustration on the left is sort of a representation of what a mobility hub could be like, and how it would sort of work and bring different services, transport services, but also additional services together, such as cafes or placemaking elements or click and collect lockers, etc. So through the Share North project, we helped East Lothian Council implement some of the mobility hub elements at the Brunton Hall. And they branded it as a journey hub. So there's, like I said earlier, there's e-bike sharing, EV charge points for the car club. There's taxi ranks in electronic information displays showing real-time passenger information for public transports, etc. And that's at the Brunton Hall, where it's a theatre and there's a cafe, so it's sort of automatically a place where people gather together. So that's a sort of journey hub pilot that will be building on with the SEStran project to help introduce a mass platform, for which we're partnering with Fuse Mobility, and they are providing the digital layer to the journey hub and that mass platform. And DRT, we see that as a key element to help improve transport services, particularly for the rural parts of the SEStran region. So for the SEStran project, we're specifically looking at introducing a DRT service in East Lothian. And at the moment, we're working with apprentice coaches and the council and Liftango to look at making the 109 service a more flexible option, and that would increase the public transport coverage in that area, whereas initially it was a fixed line service, so it wouldn't be able to pick up any other customers from or passengers from other communities. So by making it a more flexible zone, the transport coverage would be bigger than with a fixed line service. And we're also looking at some other DRT options. That there's quite a bit of potential pilots in the area. There's new housing development around Blindwells, which offers some opportunities, perhaps in the longer run, to introduce DRT or have a DRT sort of shuttle service between the new housing development and the nearest train station, to try and help encourage that sort of more sustainable transport behavior as and when people move to a new house, so, yeah, get used to using a flexible transport service. So the next steps for our region are that we'll be launching the SEStran project in spring 2022. So coming up soon in a couple of months. We're just in a mobilisation stage and getting the final agreements in place, also with Transport Scotland and the Mass Investment Fund grant funding, etc. Alongside the SEStran project, we're involved in another European project which is called PREMAS, which focuses very much on sort of best practice and policy development around mobility as a service and DRT. So we're running some events and developing a good practice guide on procurement and sort of best practices around implementing mass platforms and DRT services. So that's a sort of piece of work that's running alongside the SEStran project as we set that up. And we're exploring other potentially DRT only projects, as it were, at the stage where we were developing the project idea for the SEStran project. There was a lot of enthusiasm from our local authority partners in exploring DRT as an option to help support subsidized transport services provided by local authorities, because they see a potential in DRT optimizing some of those existing services, and as opposed to having fixed line services running in very rural areas and having empty buses, really providing something that meets customers' needs and responding to demand directly. And all of this work we're hoping to share with partners and stakeholders through a sort of open learning network, as it were, which is part of the SEStran project and funding that we secured from the Mass Investment Fund. So we envisage that we'll be running sort of workshops or events where we'll be sharing that learning to simply try and help disseminate best practices and ways of implementing DRT across our region and beyond, because there was so much interest from our local authority partners. So yeah, we'll be sharing as widely as possible. And that's it from me. I'll hand over to Kevin now, I think.
Great, thank you, Julie. That was great, and thanks, Neil, as well. It was great to get a good oversight of the regions and the demographics of your local council partnerships. So I'm Kevin Orr. I'm the CEO of Liftango. We provide demand responsive transport solutions and have been doing so for roughly 5 years all around the world. Started off in Australia, New Zealand, the US, came to the UK roughly 19 months ago during the pandemic, and projects across Europe as well. So we see a lot of different areas and where transport is fairly unique and needs a bit more of a bespoke solution or an understanding of the region. And DRT in general, we see working or being the most valuable, I should say, in rural areas. It solves a lot of problems, which I'll go through shortly. I just want to touch on the HITRANS and SEStran organizations and the value they provide, I guess, to innovation and helping councils to explore solutions such as DRT and mobility as a service. So they're very much, I guess, on the front foot of what can help their local partners and the residents in their jurisdictions, and have been strong drivers and educators of, I guess, DRT and others. So it's been great to sort of work with organizations who are looking to make change and implement, and really it's a test and learn that we see a lot of for these regions, and it's great to understand what the organizations are needing and help design and develop appropriate solutions. And I should say the rural focused solutions are some of the hardest solutions that we do provide. So to click on to the next slide. So where do we see DRT providing the value, and why do people look at DRT? The main reason we see, I guess, globally is the ghost bus, as we call it. So it's empty buses or large buses with very few passengers on them. Driving around, I guess, typically the suburbs, the regional and rural areas. And it does raise questions. People ask, why is there no one on that bus? Can we do something different? So a lot of, and that is within councils and I guess MPs within the areas asking, can we do something different? Can we do something more fitting to the demographic? So we do see DRT being implemented when we, to potentially replace inefficient fixed bus routes, or taking a look at maybe what a previous dial-a-ride service in the area has been doing, and potentially doing a rebrand or a relaunch using technology to be that kind of, I guess, excitement enabler, get more people learning about the service, using the service, and appeal to maybe different demographics. Because of technology, you can possibly access the younger demographic as well. So they're definitely, that's the main one. But beyond that, there's sort of 5 others. So the inequity of transport across a council region or a large rural area is typically quite high. You got to pick and choose your battles with fixed route, and fixed route operators, typically, private company, they're typically looking at the main trunk routes to maximize their return. There typically is subsidies coming from councils to run fixed route services through very rural areas to provide access, and that's where you would typically see the lower patronage numbers. But there is obviously, I guess, a dial-a-ride or a community transport service that provides greater access as well in those areas. And what DRT is able to do is provide, I guess, a combined or commingled service of those. So you start to have less silos of services. So instead of having dial-a-ride, community transport, and a fixed route, you've just got, I guess, one place you can go for all your options within that. And some are flexible and some are fixed, which I'll go into shortly. Similarly, per technology, I guess historically, because it's potentially a dial-a-ride service, you're using your telephone, you're calling up 24 hours in advance when potentially you could travel on that day because there's space on that vehicle. That's what technology can do. It can kind of enable, I guess, a greater utilization of those vehicles in more of a real-time setting. And not to be dismissed, the technology provides that comfort layer of notifications of where that vehicle is, the visibility of that vehicle coming towards you. I guess all the anxiety that you might get from wondering, is this bus coming? Is it, potentially waiting at a bus stop, wondering if it's left and you've missed it, or where it is. That's all gone. That anxiety's been taken away due to the messaging and the real-time visuals. Similarly, we've got, I guess, connectivity issues sometimes within the rural settings. So connecting into major hubs such as the train lines and the bus routes. Quite a lot of times in the sort of train lines, we'll see problems with parking as well. People wanting to get a sustainable mode, but not able to basically drive there and find a park in time to get that bus, which means they travel onto the main route and travel into potentially the cities via single occupancy driving. So these are other areas where we see DRT working really quite well, is those sort of feeder services into bus rapid transit or train lines. Data is a big one, which I'll touch on the next slide, but the amount of data available when you're running a DRT service is immense. There's lots you can look at and I guess adjust accordingly based on what you're getting feedback-wise and seeing in the data. And probably even more important these days with post-COVID world, wondering what people's movements are, what their new movements are, or if there's any movement at all, for example. So looking at the existing service and potentially designing better. And this one's the last one, the excess driving, is probably more focused on the bus operators, but this is a saving that can be found instead of running around rural areas with nobody on your bus and I guess wasting fuel, and that's both a sustainable problem and a economic problem. You can have a better utilization of your vehicles, only travels when it needs to travel, and it's more traveling at the right times as well. So it saves the operators, I guess, the headaches of trying to work out what is an appropriate service for people's travel behaviours. These are, I mean, DRT is working in 4 main areas we see. It's not a catch-all DRT. I think in the early days where DRT was I guess an up-and-coming sort of technology, and people were choosing to implement DRT in potentially the wrong places or in sort of silos of itself. We're seeing DRT, the knowledge and the education is growing, and we're doing a lot more in the data simulation feasibility stage to understand where DRT makes sense. And all this is really great for the communities that we're working in, is putting the vehicles and the right type of vehicles in the right places, and using fixed route where it makes sense, and DRT where it makes sense, and just creating that kind of, I guess it's a holistic system, but it's an appropriate system for what people's travel behaviors are. So underserved rural areas, I think that is probably the largest benefit, or largest area where we see the greatest benefit. What we sort of see as DRT doing is potentially providing a safety net for transport across a whole council area, for example. You might have, well, one of our examples is down in North Links. You've got 5 or 6 vehicles traveling around the zone, which is 515 square miles, so extremely large area. But it means everyone has access to a form of transport in that council region. And should there be issues with the transport network, the fixed route line, for example, which there has been with finding, I guess, and having issues with drivers leaving or sick during COVID. A lot of fixed route buses haven't been able to run certain days and things like that. So there's been a lot of fluctuation. DRT's there as a backup. Similarly, if an operator decides that he wishes to, or they wish to take a fixed route line away, we've seen that, I guess, in the past couple of years due to COVID, that sort of quick change of plans to fixed routes has happened quite a lot. There is, again, a safety net of a DRT solution to rely on. And all this just means is less complaints coming in from your residents that go into the councils and up the food chain to the MPs. There is an option there for everyone to use and access. And I think we'll see more and more of that going forward. There'll be this safety net of DRT, which is essentially bringing in the dial rides, community transports, which are already there. That is your safety net. And then fixed route will work, I guess, in the areas that it makes sense and it's profitable. And if it isn't profitable, they have an option to change things, and people still have access to transport. We do see a lot of urban and densely populated areas using DRT, but I would say these are areas where there is a transit desert within a city. We don't tend to find too many city center DRTs. That's pretty much well covered by the likes of Uber, Lyft, the ride-hail services cover those areas, and they're very profitable in those areas, so they focus there. DRT's got better fit in the areas that they don't want to go to, I would say. Sydney is a great example where they are franchising out their different parts of the transport network for integrated transport, so providing fixed route and DRT where it makes sense. They conducted a 3-year study of DRT back in 2018 is when it started, which we were part of. That was how Liftango was able to grow and learn within the sort of public transport sphere. And the result of that is to bring in DRT and save money alongside the fixed route services. So the economic decision making where DRT can save the taxpayer money is when it's combined into an integrated transport viewing. So instead of having maybe 8 fixed routes operating along an area, you might have potentially 6 fixed routes or 5 fixed routes, and then 2 or 3 DRT services feeding into those fixed routes. And that is an economic benefit to the taxpayers. Linking into the main train system. again, we see a lot of that. There's different pressures there. There's parking pressures. There's obviously, I guess, a time benefit for people who catch the train to get into the cities. They're skipping traffic and queues and costly time. So there's a lot of draw cards for people to use DRT to get into train stations and similarly getting home from train stations. So we've been seeing those for roughly 4 years now, and that was one of our first projects was the sort of regional connectivity into the train hubs, which has been working great at those sort of commute times. And finally, the community and non-emergency transport. So this is the almost unfortunately forgotten about part of our transport network. There's a lot of services out there for people with who are sick, elderly, and disabled. Unfortunately, it's not well marketed, not well known. So a lot of people don't know that these services exist, and it's really word of mouth or a bit of luck that they find out about these sort of services. There's a lot of capacity in these services to increase patronage, but also kind of move more into doing a mingle of trips of their core passenger trips, plus potentially other trips out there. And this, I guess, in some ways includes the sort of school transport. Obviously, they're working in certain hours of the day, but they're free for the middle of the day. So how can you use those assets, which is, I guess, within the council areas and the municipalities areas to leverage? How can you use those more efficiently? And these are all things that DRT or a technology layer is able to unlock. So this is where we spend a lot of our time. We work with our clients on simulations. We have a number of PhDs in our data science team who work on analyzing, I guess, the existing transport network and basically working out where DRT makes sense. So in the first instance, we would do, I guess, what we call a transit scan, a very light touch, looking at areas of a council region where there's gaps, and leveraging, I guess, the existing data sets that are there from potentially operators, councils, but also looking at census data and other demographic data as well, bring it all together to make draw up a bit of a picture of where there's problems and where there's good access. And then you can see that in sort of the second view there. You can see where I guess there is very poor access to transport in those red regions. Similarly, on the sort of green regions, you can see that they're already well catered for. And this varies throughout the day as well. So we do take snapshots across the day to say, look, these are the movements and access of people across the day as well. And the final part is looking at how DRT can be implemented. This is the bit that I guess we use our offline technology, which is the same as our algorithm that we use in the live environment, but we use it in an offline version. So we're able to get a very near real life view of, I guess, the DRT configurations that we might apply. So there's a number of different configurations. You can have a door-to-door, you can have virtual bus stops, you can have door-to-hub, for example. So we test all these different types of configurations of DRT into I guess, the regions that we've highlighted to see how best they work. And then you start to get an economic story. So you can get how many vehicles are we going to need? What is the shift pattern that we're going to need to run? That will, again, that's an economic story for the driver salaries. And similarly, you can start to see how, if it grows, how many vehicles are you going to need over time, and get a bit of a, I guess, a roadmap of this is how we want to launch a service. We may need to go to 5 vehicles, 6 vehicles, 7 vehicles over this time frame. And also we may look to expand the zone into these other areas as well. So we do all this up front. So there's a very, very clear picture that's presented back to the council of, I guess, a journey for DRT. Previously, this was maybe not done or skipped, or it was an area that was outsourced to consultants. And we just have had a few issues where the consultants don't quite know our world as much as we know it. So we do like to get into, I guess, the feasibility and the design even if there is maybe an existing design there from a consultant, just to make sure that all the KPIs, all the understandings, everyone's on the same page of what we're trying to do in the area. I can't stress enough, this is one of the biggest signals to a successful DRT, is if you do this up front, everyone is on the same page, you know what you're going to achieve or get close to going to achieve. If you don't do this stage, you might be launching DRT in the wrong area with the wrong design, and you set yourself up to fail before you even started. So we see DRT evolving, I think. I think that's why we've built a fixed route and on-demand option, or FRODO, as we like to call it internally. In the early days, it would be DRT very siloed by itself, and again, it would maybe replace a fixed route. That would be the sort of the basics of a trial, maybe 3-4 years ago. What we're seeing now is a very different structure. We're seeing DRT working in an intermodality setting. So firstly, you can't compete as a DRT service with a commercial fixed route service in the UK and most other parts of the world. So you do need to have a way to separate that out. A lot of people can do that in the design of the service, connecting into hubs, or you can take I guess a view here, which is what we've done, is saying how can we provide I guess those fixed route options to passengers instead of DRT when they've essentially asked for a trip that they can take an existing fixed route service on. So again, this is great for when you're rolling out DRT in a large council area where there's lots of different commercial fixed routes and potentially lots of different operators, bus operators, who in some cases might see DRT as an enemy or as something that is going to take the passengers away from their existing services. So this is a way to actually say, well, look, we're only doing the trips that in the area that aren't well served to date, and actually we're promoting other fixed route services or your fixed route services in the region. So a lot of this has been, I guess, greatly received by the councils and also by the operators within the region. It's very flexible as well, so you can have different rules based on your region, and that's key for when you're rolling out. I guess take the HITRANS region for example. You've got areas where there may be no fixed route for miles and miles and miles, and it might only run on a Wednesday and a Saturday, so you got to take that sort of into account. But then you've got more dense areas where there's more regularity. Excuse me. So we're seeing a lot of demand for this, I guess, integrated solution between DRT and the bus operators, and obviously we integrate into the mobility as a service solutions, which takes it to the next level again. I think an area we're seeing a lot of interest is in the ticketing space as well. How can you provide integrated ticketing on top of, I guess, offering integrated solutions or integrated journey planning with DRT and fixed and train lines as well. So to wrap up, give ourselves time for questions. The summary, I guess, is that we're seeing more integration into the broader network as I guess, where the industry is going, where our customers and our councils are essentially asking us to innovate in. And that means partnerships, working with local partners, ticketing partners, mobility as a service partners, councils. So creating the network and everyone working together towards this common goal is very, very key in this industry. Fundamentally, it is about providing access to public transport and shared modes of transport for people in those rural areas. That's where DRT has its greatest value and benefit. Does that almost overnight. Once you launch a service, everyone then has access. But then evolving that into how you can access other modes within that is where the sort of future is going. And also working with the transport partnerships and the local authorities and operators in cohesion is key. And the last slide is there. So that is a wrap up for me. I think we've got roughly 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'll invite Neil and Julie to come back on and we'll take questions. But thanks very much for your time. I hope that was useful.
Lovely, thank you, Kevin, and thank you as well to Neil and Julie for your excellent presentations and demonstration today. So as Kevin said, we will now move on to our questions and answer session. To our audience, please don't forget that you can still submit your questions using the question panels, which is located in the menu on the right. So let's take a look at our first question from the audience today. So this one is for Kevin, and you did touch on this very briefly, but one of our audience members just wanted you to expand on it a bit more. And they asked, what happens for the elderly who are unable to request a service for DRT due to struggles with technology?
Great question. We don't say that you should roll out, I guess, a mobile app only service for DRT. The current users of DRT are typically, I guess, the older demographic who will potentially never have a mobile phone, might not have a mobile phone that's kind of able to have the latest apps. So we don't even essentially try. So having a call center, be that a call center that Liftango provides or a call center that is provided by the local operator using our technology, those are things that we see are basically already in the fundamental designs and non-negotiables of the councils. I guess what DRT and the application of having a mobile app and a bit more real-time flexibility does is it increases the demographic down into school children, university sort of age, a younger demographic essentially, and gives them sort of, I guess, greater flexibility and access. The middle-aged demographics still have, I guess, that they're not the key travelers on DRT that we see. It might be due to having cars, and once they've made that transition to owning a car and taking a loan out in the car, potentially it's hard to move them into more sustainable modes. There's always certain moments in someone's life that's almost a transactional moment. If they've crashed a car or moved house, for example, those are all moments where they might change their travel behaviors. But it is hard to transition them if they own a car. That is simply a fact. So yeah, look, technology is great for the internal benefits optimization. You get people moving away from dispatch and moving into more advantageous areas or beneficial areas of their company. But for people with, I guess, an older demographic who are never going to change, we don't try to change them. They can call up as they've always done. In fact, they can call up and book further in advance or on the day. So there is a little bit more flexibility for them that they maybe don't see, but it's there.
Lovely, thank you, Kevin. I don't know, Neil, Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I suppose just come in briefly. No, I think that's essential to it, and I think the one thing that we see is all it does is add value to the existing circumstances where predominantly a lot of these services are being used by the elderly, and it's opening it up to that younger cohort of the population and making it more attractive to them, I think is key to its growth. And as long as we ensure, as Kevin says, that nothing's lost and the existing methods of booking it are still available, then it can only add value.
Yeah, same from my point of view. I think it's really important that you're not removing something that people are used to using, particularly elderly people using an existing DRT service, and if they're used to dialing in and booking onto that, right? So I think adding that digital layer can help with the optimizing the service and potentially have additional touch points for customers to book the service, so adding to the options. But yeah, I think it's really important to keep the phone bookings available as well.
Lovely, thank you. And then the next question that I have is most likely for all three of you, but maybe I'll come to Neil first about this one. And one of our audience members has asked, would DRT services cost the same for passengers as standard fixed route services?
It's a good question, and it depends on the service and the geography. in some instances they will. In others, the model that we might look for is something that is something like a bridge between what the equivalent of a taxi would cost and the public transport service. Obviously, in our part of the world, there is now free travel for under 22s and also concession holders at the other end of the spectrum, over 65. So there's a significant element of the population who would be travelling free, but in terms of those paid for services, it'll be a mixed picture.
Lovely, thank you, Neil. And Julie, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, similar. From our point of view, it really depends on how the DRT service is sort of planned and what the operators' plans are as well. So what we're currently looking at in East Lothian with Prentice as the local operator is more sort of different zones. So a different fare would apply to or it would depend on the zone in which you're traveling. And I think what's really important is just to emphasize is price transparency of DRT services, so people know in advance what to expect, and it's a reliable sort of similar type of price that they're paying for DRT service to have that transparency and reliability of services.
Thank you. And Kevin, I don't know your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree. I think that you have to be flexible because the price is already typically set, 10, 20 years ago in those regions, and changing them can be contentious, right? So yeah, with our payment structures, we have to have different sort of payment matrices and different zone structures that we have to cater for. I would say that we do see a lot of price sensitivity to DRT. There's, I think the trials that we were part of in Sydney in the early days, you can't be too far away from a public transport bus price without losing, I guess, the goodwill of the passengers. So we've seen in the past maybe DRT providers, this is more in the US to be fair, they've tried to offer slightly higher prices and take on public transport, even though it's subsidized, and ultimately that's failed. So DRT has to be subsidized, has to be part of the solution within, I guess, the public transport network, and has to be priced maybe a little bit higher because it is a bit more flexible, a little bit more convenient, but not much. It's got to be pretty close to the existing bus fares.
Lovely, thank you. And then just sticking with you there, Kevin, as well, another question that we have is, can you identify some good examples of effective and affordable marketing for DRT in order to raise awareness and understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I think marketing is that forgotten piece, not by ourselves, but by the councils. I don't think they realise maybe how much power and influence they can have for creating a very successful DRT service, just simply by spending a bit of marketing or internally using their trust and their voice and brand in the region. So we do work with we have an internal marketing team who work with our clients, so work with Neil and Julie and various councils on using what's worked in the past. So I guess as use cases, I can use almost most of our other examples of our successful DRT rollout. BC Go in the States, it's probably a really good one there. They've been very, very good in continually to use their existing brand to promote it. But yeah, I think getting MPs involved, local ambassadors, getting I guess a local groundswell of trusted people is key to successful rollout. Definitely not one to be forgotten, that marketing piece. That's nothing worse than launching without telling anybody what you've got available to them.
Absolutely, thank you. And Neil, Julie, what have your experiences been with this in terms of raising awareness of DRT schemes?
This to me is got the biggest potential of the lot as far as we're concerned. As I mentioned my presentation, you know, there are multiple services across our region that have often very little public awareness within their own locality, let alone wider afield. And we have obviously a huge volume of visitors to our area, and having something under a single platform with a strong brand is going to be a really important element of this, I think, in terms of marketing all of those services and improving ridership of them right across the board. So yeah, I think it's an essential element of it all.
And from our point of view, we're a bit in the sort of planning stage of this still, so we haven't necessarily got an experience to share just yet. But what we are planning is to sort of advertise or you know, tap into existing channels, such as through the local authority, our local authority partner in the project, the operator themselves, etc. And just to add to the sort of marketing element of it, I think there's a bit of thinking that we need to do around how to approach certain user groups, or I think word of mouth is really important element of this as well. So if we encourage certain user groups, for instance, or try and target certain user groups to use the service, that can lead to that sort of word of mouth marketing, and if they have a good experience, sharing that with the local community, etc. Also, things like we've got existing relationships with community partnerships, for instance. So yeah, looking to work collaboratively with partners to do that marketing piece.
Lovely, thank you. And then just as we come to the end of the webinar today, just one quick question, I think, and Kevin, I'm going to come to you for this again as well. How is ticketing handled for on-demand and DRT services?
Really, it varies. I mean, we also have it where you can pay through the application. You can pay over the phone if you're calling up. It can be a credit card. You can have a cash if we are moving away from cash, to be honest, and that's benefit for everybody. It's just cumbersome to manage. But we're moving into more of an integrated ticketing world. So working with the existing ticketing providers, it gets complex because there's revenue share that happens, I guess, across if it's intermodal. But having partnerships, I guess, with local groups is starting to become the norm. So if there's an existing public transport ticketing system, we'll integrate into that because that's one of the strongest and most trusted methods already there. But I would say providing a way to be flexible, provide a credit card payment over the phone, over the app is starting to become a norm as well. And yeah, cash can be there too. If it's if people are used to it, if people have the existing structures in place, we can use that there as well. And if people are used to it, then great. So basically, to summarize, it's very flexible. Whatever's already in place there and used is what we provide as options.
Lovely, thank you. And Julie, Neil, just as we come to the end, have you got any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's similar to the sort of way in which people can book the service. Having different payment options is really important to make, and yeah, the booking of the payment for the service as easy as possible from a customer's point of view. So you have different options. So yeah, contactless or through the app would be the sort of standard, I think. But yeah, a lot of operators still accept cash to a certain extent as well. So I think it's that slow transition away from cash payments. But again, certain groups of the population might still rely on using cash, for instance. So having those different options is really key, I would say.
Nothing to add from me on that.
Lovely, thanks, Neil. Well, thank you all so much for that. Unfortunately, it is all that we have time for today. I'd like you to join me in thanking the audience for attending today, and also thank you to Kevin, Neil and Julie for your fantastic presentations and the brilliant answers at the end there. To our audience, as you leave the webinar, a very short survey will appear on your screen asking you to rate the webinar today. Please do take a moment to provide your feedback. If now isn't a good time, the survey will also be sent to you shortly afterwards via email. If you can please complete this, we would greatly appreciate it. On behalf of Intelligent Transport and Liftango, I would like to thank you all for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.